Hello. Welcome back to Module 4, Authority is Constructed and Contextual. Today, we will continue with Section 2, Critical Thinking. In this video, which is the second of two on the subject, we will look at a specific model that will help you to become a better critical thinker. Dr. Richard Paul and Dr. Linda Elder developed a framework for critical thinking that is used at a number of colleges and universities. According to Paul and Elder, there are two essential parts to thinking: the elements of reasoning and the universal intellectual standards. The elements of reasoning allow you to focus on your thinking about a topic. You can use them to analyze a text, explore a question, and develop your own perspective. First, you should know that all reasoning has a purpose. Can you state your purpose clearly? What is the objective of your research? Does your reasoning stay focused throughout your goal? Is your purpose fair in context, considering all relevant persons or other species? Is your goal realistic? All reasoning is an attempt to figure something out, to settle some question, to solve some problem. What main question are you trying to answer? Are there other ways to think about the question? Can you divide the question into sub-questions? What questions would you need to ask and answer before you could answer the main question? Is this a question that has one right answer, or can there be more than one reasonable answer? Does this question require judgment rather than facts alone? All reasoning is based on assumptions. What assumptions are you making? Are they justified? How are your assumptions shaping your point of view? Which of your assumptions might reasonably be questioned? All reasoning is done from a point of view. What is your point of view? What insights is it based on? What are its weaknesses? What other points of view should be considered in reasoning through the problem? What are the strengths and weaknesses of these viewpoints? Are you fair-mindedly considering the insights behind these viewpoints? All reasoning is based on data, information, and evidence. To what extent is your reasoning supported by relevant data? How can you make sure your reasoning is based on information that is accurate or true? How do you know you are not distorting information to fit your selfish or vested interests? Does the data suggest explanations that differ from those you have given? How clear, accurate, and relevant are the data to the question at issue? Have you gathered sufficient data to reach a reasonable conclusion? All reasoning is expressed through, and shaped by, concepts and ideas. What key ideas and theories are guiding your reasoning? What alternative explanations might be possible, given these concepts and theories? Do you deliberately take command of the ideas that guide your reasoning and control the quality of your life? Are you distorting ideas to fit your agenda? All reasoning contains inference or interpretations by which we draw conclusions and give meaning to data. To what extent does the data support your conclusions? Are your inferences consistent with each other? Are there other reasonable inferences that should be considered? Are you able to consider alternative possibilities when coming to conclusions, or do you lock yourself into one way of interpreting situations? All reasoning leads somewhere or has implications and consequences. What implications and consequences follow from your reasoning? If we accept your line of reasoning, what implications or consequences are likely? If you decide to X, what might immediately follow from your decision? What might follow from acting upon that decision in the long run as the implications and consequences spiral out? The second essential part of thinking is universal intellectual standards, which allow you to evaluate the quality of your thinking. Clarity. Clarity is a gateway standard. If a statement is unclear, we cannot determine whether it is accurate or relevant. In fact, we cannot tell anything about it because we do not yet know what it is saying. For example, the question "what can be done about the education system in America?" is unclear. In order to adequately address the question, we would need to have a clear understanding of what the person asking the question is considering the problem to be. Could you elaborate further? Could you give an example? Could you illustrate what you mean? Accuracy. A statement can be clear but not accurate, as in most dogs weigh more than 300 pounds. How could we check on that? How could we find out if that is true? How could we verify or attest that? Precision. A statement can be both clear and accurate but not precise, as in Jack is overweight. We do not know how overweight Jack is. Does he weigh 1 pound or 500 pounds? Could you be more specific? Could you give more details? Could you be more exact? Relevance. A statement can be clear, accurate, and precise but not relevant to the question at issue. For example, students often think that the amount of effort they put into a course should be used in raising their grade. Often, however, effort does not measure the quality of student learning, and when that is so, effort is irrelevant to their appropriate grade. How does the question relate to the problem? How does the problem bear on the question? How does that help with the issue? Depth. A statement can be clear, accurate, precise, and relevant, but superficial, that is, it lacks depth. For example, the slogan "Just Say No," which was used for a number of years to discourage children and teens from using drugs, is clear, accurate, precise, and relevant. Nevertheless, those who use this approach treat a highly complex issue, the pervasive problem of drug use among young people, superficially. It fails to deal with the complexities of the issue. What factors make this a difficult problem? What are some of the complexities of the question? What are some of the difficulties we need to deal with? Breadth. A line of reasoning may be clear, accurate, precise, relevant, and deep but lack breadth, as in an argument from two widely divergent standpoints that gets deeply into an issue but only recognizes the insights of one side of the question. Do we need to look at the issue from another perspective? Do we need to consider another point of view? Do we need to look at this in other ways? Logic. When we think, we bring a variety of thoughts together into some order. When the combination of thoughts is mutually supporting and makes sense in combination, the thinking is logical. When the combination is not mutually supporting, is contradictory in some sense, or does not make sense, the combination is not logical. Do your conclusions make sense together? Does your first paragraph fit in with your last? Does what you say follow from the evidence? Fairness. We naturally think from our own perspective, from a point of view that tends to privilege our position. Fairness implies the treating of all relevant viewpoints alike without reference to one's own feelings or interests. Because we tend to be biased in favor of our own viewpoint, it is important to keep the standard of fairness at the forefront of our thinking. This is especially important when the situation may call on us to see things we do not want to see or give something up that we want to hold on to. Do you have a vested interest in the issue in question? Are you sympathetically representing the viewpoints of others? Have you fully and fairly considered all the important information relevant to the issue? Sufficiency. Does the reader have sufficient information to answer the question? Are you unfairly leaving out information you would rather not consider in order to get more for one group while ignoring or downplaying the rights and needs of others? Significance. Is this the important problem to consider? Is this the central idea to focus on? Which of these facts are most important? Humility. Intellectual humility depends on recognizing that one should not claim more than one actually knows. It does not imply spinelessness or submissiveness. It implies the lack of intellectual pretentiousness, boastfulness, or conceit, combined with insight into the logical foundations, or lack of such foundations, of one's beliefs. To be aware of the limits of your knowledge, you need the intellectual courage to face your prejudices and ignorance. What do you really know, about yourself, about the situation, about another person, about your nation, about what is going on in the world? To what extent do your prejudices or biases influence your thinking? To what extent have you been indoctrinated into beliefs that may be false? How do the beliefs you have uncritically accepted keep you from seeing things as they are? Courage. Intellectual courage is having a consciousness of the need to face and fairly address ideas, beliefs, or viewpoints toward which we have strong negative emotions and to which we have not given a serious hearing. This courage is connected with the recognition that ideas we consider dangerous or absurd are sometimes rationally justified, in whole or in part, and that conclusions and beliefs inculcated in us are sometimes false or misleading. To determine for ourselves which is which, we must not passively and uncritically accept what we have learned. To discover your own prejudices, you must often intellectually empathize with and fair-mindedly reason within viewpoints with which you disagree. Intellectual courage comes into play here, because inevitably we will come to see some truth in some ideas considered dangerous or absurd, and distortion and falsity in some ideas strongly held in our social group. We need courage to be true to our own thinking in such circumstances. The penalties for nonconformity can be severe. To what extent have you analyzed the beliefs you hold? To what extent have you questioned your beliefs, many of which you learned in childhood? To what extent have you demonstrated a willingness to give up your beliefs when sufficient evidence is presented against them? To what extent are you willing to stand up against the majority, even though people might ridicule you? Empathy. Intellectual empathy is having a consciousness of the need to imaginatively put oneself in the place of others in order to genuinely understand them. This trait correlates with the ability to consider the viewpoints and reasoning of others and to reason from premises, assumptions, and ideas other than our own. Using this strategy, which is called steel manning, you make the strongest possible case for an opposing viewpoint. Steel manning is the opposite of a straw man argument, in which you construct the weakest of an argument in order to more easily defeat it. Intellectual empathy also correlates with the willingness to remember occasions when we were wrong in the past despite an intense conviction that we were right, and with the ability to imagine our being similarly deceived in the case at hand. Achieving these ends requires intellectual perseverance because learning to enter viewpoints that differ from your own can take significant effort, requiring you to work through misconceptions, uncover faulty assumptions, and rework those assumptions to fit a more reasonable or logical picture of reality. Autonomy. Intellectual autonomy is having rational control of one's beliefs, values, and inferences. The idea of critical thinking is to learn to think for oneself, to gain command over one's thought processes. It entails a commitment to analyzing and evaluating beliefs on the basis of reason and evidence, to question when it is rational to question, to believe what is rational to believe, and to conform when it is rational to conform. To what extent are you a conformist? To what extent do you uncritically accept what you are told by your government, the media, or your peers? Do you think through issues on your own, or do you meekly accept the views of others? Having thought through an issue from a rational perspective, are you willing to stand alone despite the irrational criticism of others? Integrity. Intellectual integrity is the recognition of the need to be true to one's thinking, to be consistent in the intellectual standards one applies, to hold oneself to the same rigorous standards of evidence and proof to which one holds one's antagonists, to practice what one advocates for others, and honestly admit discrepancies and inconsistencies in one's own thought and action. Do you behave in accordance with what you say you believe, or do you tend to say one thing and do another? To what extent do you expect the same of yourself as you expect of others? To what extent are there contradictions or inconsistencies in your life? To what extent do you strive to recognize and eliminate self-deception in your life? Perseverance. Intellectual perseverance is having a consciousness of the need to use intellectual insights and truth in spite of difficulties, obstacles, and frustrations. Firm adherence to rational principles despite the irrational opposition of others, a sense of the need to struggle with confusion and unsettled questions over an extended period of time to achieve deeper understanding or insight. This effort will not seem reasonable unless you have the necessary confidence and reason to believe you will not be tainted or taken in by false or misleading ideas in considering alternative views. Are you willing to work your way through complexities in an issue, or do you tend to give up when you experience difficulty? Can you think of a difficult intellectual problem to which you have demonstrated patience and determination in working through the difficulties? Do you have strategies for dealing with complex problems? Do you expect learning to be easy, or do you recognize the importance of engaging in challenging intellectual work? Confidence in reasoning. Assurance that, in the long run, one's own higher interests and those of humankind at large will be best served by giving the freest play to research and by encouraging people to come to their own conclusions by developing their own rational faculties. Faith that, with proper encouragement and cultivation, people can learn to think for themselves, to form rational viewpoints, draw reasonable conclusions, think coherently and logically, persuade each other by reason, and become reasonable persona, despite the deep-seated obstacles in the native character of the human mind and in society as we know it. Are you willing to change your position when the evidence leads to a more reasonable position? Do you adhere to principles of sound reasoning when persuading others of your position, or do you distort matters to support your position? Do you deem it more important to win an argument or to see the issue from the reasonable perspective? Do you encourage others to come to their own conclusions, or do you try to force your views on them? Fair-mindedness. Fair-mindedness is having a consciousness of the need to treat all viewpoints alike, without reference to one's own feelings or vested interests, or the feelings or vested interest of one's friends, community, or nation. This implies adherence to intellectual standards without reference to one's own advantage or the advantage of one's group. To what extent do self-interests or biases tend to cloud your judgment? How do you tend to treat relevant viewpoints? Do you tend to favor some over others? If so, why? To what extent do you appropriately weigh the strengths and weaknesses of all significant relevant perspectives when reasoning through an issue? What personal interests do you have at stake and how do you ensure that you do not favor your own interests over the common good? Next time. In the next video, we'll talk about another widely used model. This one is designed to gauge the trustworthiness and dependability of information. Until then, thank you for your time. If you want to learn more about the subjects we have discussed, these are the sources used for Part 2.